So in this video, we're going to take a look at John 13. I'm going to spend just time right now looking at verses 1 through verse 15. So we'll begin by noticing something that is oftentimes taken a lot of attention about this particular episode in John's Gospel, and that is determining whether or not what Jesus is doing here is eating a Passover meal. So, as most people are aware, in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus has his disciples prepare a Passover meal, and he eats a Passover meal on the night that he is betrayed. And so, the question here is what we are reading in John 13. Is this Passover meal that is being described in the Synoptic Gospel? So there are several who will say, no, this is not a Passover meal. And it's indicated that references to subsequent Passovers so far and the observance of the day of preparation would argue against it. So, we have in verse 1 that it was just before the Passover meal. And then we have this evening meal that was in progress. So it's not at the Passover yet. And so there is references in chapter 19 to concern about the day of preparation for the Passover. Now, some modern English translations will want to render the expression that's here in Greek as the preparation week, but the term week is not found in the Greek text, and so this is an interpretation that some English translators are using in order to try and harmonize the actual date of Jesus's crucifixion with that of the synoptics. So there are others who have argued, yes, that this is the Passover meal. The fact that we have in verse 2 that the evening meal or the supper is thought to be most naturally referring to a Passover meal. Others have references to Passover as a subsequent event are actually talking about the Passover week. And so that's why you have that in the English text, including the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread follows after the day of Passover. So we will have scholars who will take different views about this. Also, references to the day of preparation are actually talking about the preparation to observe the Sabbath, since Jesus was crucified on a Friday, and the Sabbath would have started that evening. So you have some arguments that it is and arguments that it isn't, and so that's where it's kind of left. For my own view, I tend to think that the references to the preparation of the Passover is a reference to the preparation of a Passover meal itself, and that in John's Gospel, John is depicting Jesus as being crucified at the same time that lambs are being slaughtered for the Passover meal. But it is an issue where there are different arguments for and against. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read a few verses at a time instead of all of 1 through 15. So we'll begin, first of all, with verses 1 through 3. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So, first of all, that Jesus knows his hour has come. So throughout the gospel, there's been references to this hour. And so for John, the hour of Jesus' glorification is going to be the crucifixion, not just the resurrection, but the crucifixion itself. And so that hour, meaning that is significant event, not a 60-minute period, but a significant event is upon him. Now, this way in which it's read here in the NIV, loved his own who are in the world, is rendering this as telos, agapes, and autos. So there are different ways in which this Greek expression could be rendered. So some may have think about he showed them the full extent of his love. So Kostenberger and some other versions of the NIV have read it in that way. Some have understood it as he completely loved them. So, or he loved them to the end. This is how it is rendered in the New Revised Standard Version and a version of the NIV. So we have these different ways of understanding it, and so the interest is what is John really trying to express. So whichever way we are to take it, the important thing I think is that love here is being understood in a self-sacrificing way. That what Jesus is showing his disciples is that he loves them to the point of giving up his life. And so in John's gospel, towards the end of the gospel, this love has that kind of connotation or nuance that one is going to self-sacrifice. Now, the devil puts the thought that Judas will hand over Jesus, but leaves unclear into whom he puts this thought. So is it that the devil has already prompted Judas to betray Jesus? And it's not really quite clear whether or not we are supposed, this thought is going to be, a thing that happens in Judas himself. So this handing over is this idea of kind of betraying Jesus. And so there's a little bit of unclarity in the Greek text about actually how this is done. Jesus prepares to wash his disciples' feet, knowing three things. He knows that the Father had given him all things, and that he had come from God, and that he was going to God. So having this kind of knowledge is the knowledge that kind of gives him his resolution, his determination in order to carry out this particular activity. All right, let's go to 4, starting in verse 4. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. So Jesus takes on the role here of a servant or a slave who would carry out the activity of washing the feet of guests. So it's not quite clear in this setting who, in what house Jesus is at. In the synoptic, for the Passover meal, he goes into an upper room. That's not indicated here. Depending upon who one thinks the beloved disciple is, and that the beloved disciple is sitting next to Jesus, could this be the home of the beloved disciple? The beloved disciple is not the Apostle John, but some kind of Judean disciple. And so what should happen is the host has preparation for some kind of servant or some individual who will wash the feet of the guest. And so Jesus is going to take this on, whether or not the event actually had occurred. He's going to wash their feet as a kind of an object lesson. When it comes to Peter, Peter objects because he misunderstands. And so this is a common feature in John's gospel, that people very oftentimes misunderstand Jesus' words or Jesus' actions. And so this becomes true as well for Peter. It's not until later, maybe after the resurrection, that Peter is going to understand what it is that Jesus does. And so, in a way, what Jesus does in washing feet symbolizes what Jesus is going to be doing on the cross. He is going to serve others. He's going to serve his disciples. He's going to serve those who are his followers by taking on the form of a servant and giving his life. Jesus announces that if he does not wash, he uses the Greek word here, nipso, him, he has no share with him. But it's not really quite clear what this washing is referring to. So do we have something here else in mind? Is it baptism specifically? So in other words, is Jesus thinking of this washing as kind of a symbol of baptism, and that Christians must be, individuals must be baptized in order to have a share with Jesus? But the question, if that was the case, why isn't the Greek word luo used instead of nipso? Maybe it has the idea of forgiveness in general, that this washing is a way of symbolizing forgiveness. The verb is used frequently in this story and in the healing of the blind man. Of course, the healing of the blind man, John chapter 9, has the question about sin. And this blind man is receiving his sight, and so it could be said that it might be seen or perceived that this blind man has been forgiven of whatever sin is the cause or the reason for his blindness. So maybe Jesus has a washing here in mind of receiving forgiveness. So Jesus says disciples, and what you might not pick up in an English translation, but here we have is a plural you. You are not or will be clean, but not all of them. So we have in 10b and in 11 this kind of recognition of that there's already somebody who's going to betray Jesus. So, in other words, Jesus knows who his betrayer is. That is something that's indicated as well within the Synoptic Gospels. So, Jesus is not someone who is duped by one of his closest associates, but knew all along what was getting ready to happen to him. Jesus will later talk about having cleansed them by the word that he has spoken to them. So we have a washing that symbolizes cleansing, but another cleansing actually takes place from the spoken word. All right, we're going to end here with looking at verses 12 through 15. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. So, a couple of things here to note in these instructions to disciples. In verse 15, the question is Jesus telling his disciples to follow his example? And so Jesus is illustrating that he takes on the form of a servant. Of course, this anticipates his death on the cross. So is he really asking his disciples to follow this example of being a servant towards one another and being willing to die a martyr's death, a death on behalf of others? The same idea of a martyr's death can be found in lots of Jewish texts, such as Second Maccabees and Fourth Maccabees, work of Ben Sirach. We also can see it in First Peter chapter 2. And this idea might also be strengthened by the fact that in verse 16, Jesus quotes a proverb, and that is found in another context in the Synoptics where the focus is on withstanding persecution. So maybe this idea of following Jesus' example and serving each other is really supposed to indicate that they are to be willing to give their lives for one another. And that will demonstrate love. So in other words, he loved them by willing to give his life. And so the question really is, do they love each other? Now, I wouldn't say that this is a text, even though we have here this, in verse 15, the statement that I've set you an example. This is not an institution of foot washing. There are some Christian traditions that think that as a part of the way in which they follow Jesus is to have periods where disciples will wash each other's feet, because this is what Jesus indicates here. But Jesus said that his disciples would do as kathos he has done. He doesn't say to them to do what he has done. So it is the case that we are supposed to follow an example of self-sacrifice in, doing for others, doing for our brothers and sisters in Christ in ways that we are humble ourselves and maybe is self-sacrificing. And so it's not about particularly washing feet. And as well, one might point to the fact that in the first couple of decades and century after the New Testament was written, we don't really see an institution of foot washing as a practice that disciples thought they had received from Jesus. So that too would kind of count against that. All right, that brings us up to John 13:15, and we will leave it with that.